So now moving to our guest lecture. I'm delighted to welcome Professor Will Hueston as our speaker today.
Well, I'm thrilled to be here. First, to honor Lord Soulsby, whose texts I also studied during my veterinary course. To be here to celebrate all of the honorary awardees, the new counselors, the registered veterinary nurses that are beginning or continuing their career, and so much more. This has been a voyage of education for me to learn about the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons. Little would my ancestors have recognized that leaving London first as a cobbler who was burned out in the Great Fire of London, Cornish deep miner who left when the pit closed, a farmer, or the fourth son, if you will, of a Devon farmer who didn't get the land or the military title or the position in the church, and so fled to America for opportunities. And lastly, the impoverished farmer from County Fermanagh that left in the potato famine of 1848. So I stand here returning, in a sense, to my motherland, so it's a great honor. I also stand here recognizing that if I'm correct, I have now about 4.5 minutes for my presentation. So I'm going to ask you to humor me by, if you will, all of those of you who so care, please stand. And as you're standing, I invite you to put your arms over your head and hold them there. Now, as I hope knowledge will register, we know now we have the scientific evidence from physiology that if we hold our hands above our heads for 20 seconds at least, it changes the way in which we think. It redirects the blood flow of the brain so that we are able to better reach our higher thinking capacities. We can retain more information, and we can think more creatively. All of which you will need to put into effect in the remaining 3.5 minutes of my talk. Please be seated. So where I'm going to start here, I like this rule of 3. So I'm going to talk about our glorious past. I'm going to talk about the challenges of the present, and then end on the future opportunities, the way forward. So we have indeed a glorious past in terms of science, in terms of politics, and in terms of beliefs. We have, through science, the systematic study, through observation and experimentation, advanced the care of individual animals through disease diagnosis, treatment, and care. We've advanced the care for populations of animals, the protection of public health through the control of zoonoses, through the food safety, and also through, if you will, maintaining the psychological well-being of the nation through the care of companion animals. And I might add, in terminology that most of us were not taught, we have contributed to global food security, the availability and accessibility of affordable, nutritious, and safe food for all to support the lifestyle of their choice. In terms of politics, those activities associated with governance, we're here to celebrate, in a sense, an example of that, of organized veterinary medicine, of self-governance that continues to emphasize quality assurance and continuous improvement, as Bradley emphasized. It's also the fact that globally, veterinary medicine has organized, and organized first in Europe, the World Organization of Animal Health, known by its French acronym, the OIE, which formed through state veterinary services gathering together upon an outbreak of rinderpest after World War I and saying diseases do not respect national boundaries. The control of disease, the promotion of public health requires that we work together across boundaries, across professions, and it was, in fact, the nations of Europe, joined by the Kingdom of Siam, interestingly enough, that formed in 1924 the World Organization of Veterinary Medicine, or the World Veterinary Organization, the OIE, which has led then, in terms of politics, to the formulation of international standards that are now recognized by the World Trade Organization as the global standards for the safe movement of animals and animal products, including food, around the world. They have also been absolutely critical to the coordinated approach to disease global control and or global disease control and eradication, most recently in the permanent eradication of rinderpest, something that in my veterinary education was never even mentioned as a possibility. The third politics success of this World Veterinary Association, the OIE, has been the development of a set of competencies for national veterinary services and the offering of a voluntary assessment for countries of the world to assess the capacity of their veterinary services to protect public health, to reduce the transmission of transboundary animal diseases, to maintain high-quality veterinary education. And it's very exciting to report that 133 countries of the world have requested and completed that voluntary self-assessment of their national veterinary services, and I'll come back to that. Third, the glorious past in terms of beliefs. Beliefs are an acceptance, or the acceptance that something is true with or without evidence. So in the belief area, it's absolutely thrilling that we can stand here recognizing that the veterinarian occupies a unique place in society, that we have gained a high level of respect and trust. I should emphasize, often because of the stellar performance of the veterinary nurses that in many cases make us look better than what we might actually be. This acceptance also extends into the belief that veterinary services is one of the basic foundations of government. Now let me move on then to the challenges of the present. First, veterinary practice. Veterinary practice now is largely seen by the general public and by many in our profession as the care of companion animals. Our veterinary faculties, the new students entering the veterinary field, those entering veterinary nursing, are attracted to the profession because of the opportunity to be the gentle doctor, to be the veterinary nurse caring for companion animals that are so much a part of our lives, our society, and in many cases our families. And while this is all good, we risk becoming a profession of specialized physicians for pets, while at the same time abdicating our responsibility for populations, for public health, for global food security. Now, while I started as a veterinary practitioner, my wife, who's also a veterinarian, and I support a number of local veterinarians, both companion animal practices, equine and food animal practices for the care of our own animals. I am concerned that this care of companion animals is largely a private good, meaning it benefits the animal and the owner who pays for the service, in contrast to a public good which is a good that benefits everyone, regardless of whether or not they individually have paid for it. So food safety, the prevention of the spread of transboundary animal diseases, global food security are all public goods. They, I believe, are also right at the heart of what, to me, the veterinary profession and veterinary nursing are all about. I'll speak secondly about education. When the OIE has applied their performance of veterinary services evaluation to these 133 countries around the world, the majority of which, by the way, have been developing countries, because such countries as the United States, Canada, Great Britain, have elected not to have their veterinary services evaluated independently to date. Well, what they have found is that, in fact, one of the shortcomings of almost all of the 133 countries, of about 190 countries in the world, is veterinary education and veterinary continuing education for practitioners. Unfortunately, we also find that, by and large, veterinary pedagogy around the world is based on lecture and recitation. It is a process of memorizing your way to a veterinary credential. On top of which, we have most veterinary education establishments. I certainly can speak authoritatively about the United States, that despite recommendation upon recommendation over the last 25 years, that we established centers of emphasis within veterinary education. Almost every veterinary education establishment feels they must be everything to everyone. So whether you're in the state of Minnesota, which leads the nation in turkey production and number 3 in swine production and number 5 in dairy production, and still maintains a critical mass of teaching staff in each of those areas, if you happen to attend a veterinary education establishment that has no pigs in the population, no dairy cows, and no poultry, those subjects are taught by individuals who have no specialization in those areas. Thirdly, then, we have increasingly, and I celebrate, moved towards the recognition of the need to think about competencies, training for competencies simply for our knowledge of facts and our manual dexterity at skills. Those competencies have been more clearly articulated as it relates to clinical practice. Not so well for those parts of practice that are public good practice. I might also point out that frequently in the last 30 years of my career, since I left private veterinary practice, there have been many individuals from our own profession who approached and said, "Will, so when did you stop being a practitioner?" To which I respond, I am still a practitioner. Whereas your clients are individuals who bring their pets or farmers who bring their animals. My clients are governments or global food companies that bring to me the challenges they face in terms of a country or a company dealing with these increasingly complex challenges we face. So we too, I would argue, are practitioners. So lastly, evidence-based, a challenge. I really applaud knowledge and your efforts here to characterize and begin to crystallize the evidence base around veterinary practice. I think that's very exciting because I am concerned that we as a profession are in danger of accepting some of the scientific findings we were taught in our education as beliefs. As beliefs. In other words, despite the evidence, the growing evidence, we stick to that belief and defend that position, whether that be animal welfare, whether that be antibiotic resistance, and the list goes on. For me, this recognition was proven by the fact that I spent a good part of my career, including a secondment here to what was then called Central Veterinary Lab in 1991, to the epidemiology unit studying bovine spongiform encephalopathy, and then for 6 years serving on the Spongiform Encephalopathy Advisory Committee for the UK, recognizing that many of the facts that I had learned in my veterinary course were wrong. That in fact there can be diseases with significant spread, significant public health implications that are not associated with any organism that contains nucleic acid. That alone would have flunked me out of veterinary school. I also am humbled by the fact that just this week the World Health Organization has stepped forward and put in front of all of us an independent review that says, basically, we made so many mistakes in our global response to Ebola that we bear the responsibility for catalyzing the epidemic that has ensued. We, the global community of health professionals, in our response to Ebola, got so many things wrong that we have extended this epidemic, leading directly to additional deaths and destructions of economies and societies. And lastly, then, the recognition that our scientific knowledge is constantly changing. As I've witnessed in this most recent outbreak of avian influenza H5N2 in the United States, which has now claimed 42.5 million laying chickens, 10% of the laying chickens in the United States, 7.5 million turkeys. A virus that evolved over the course of this epidemic, and a situation that was potentiated by the development of these massive egg-laying operations that followed all the latest in our biosecurity recommendations, where you could have as many as 4 million layers in one premise. We don't yet understand how the disease spread. We have a pretty good idea that our inability to rapidly respond to a highly pathogenic avian influenza virus resulted in vast numbers of those chickens, about 90% of those chickens or more, dying within 6 days of the disease breaking, creating a plume of virus that was probably spread by the wind. So that all the biosecurity that we think about normally in animal production would have been insufficient, which causes us now to wonder whether we need to look at HEPA filtering for the air quality. Radical. So, through all of this, one other point on evidence-based, I am very concerned, this comes back to education, that our educational institutions and our accrediting bodies say that we must have active research in our educational institutions to help guide our teaching. We are encouraged by our principals and our deans to work as teams, and we are rewarded for our individual effort. Our individual effort. Those things we can attribute to our single activity, not the activity of teams. In fact, it goes further, and that those who talk about what is being rewarded now is basically the scholarship of discovery of new knowledge. And we have forgotten the opportunities for the scholarship of integration of information from multiple disciplines, the scholarship of application, applying to the field. So, future opportunities. So, I want to move then to the positive note, what I see as the grand opportunity. Well, change is the only certainty of the future. We know that science will change. We know that politics will change. We know that beliefs will change. That is both frightening and hopeful. Because while we cannot predict change with any degree of certainty, we can anticipate change and prepare for change. We will see foot and mouth disease again in the UK. We will see the emergence of new diseases. In fact, we will see a faster emergence of new diseases because of the rapidity of change. What our colleagues are saying now, it's change in land use that is driving the emergence of a lot of diseases, and that's not only human encroachment on areas of natural areas of wildlife environment, it's also changes in development pattern and the reestablishment of plant communities. So we saw Lyme disease in the United States emerge because after we had chopped down all of the trees of New England, often to build ships for the British Navy, we then found as the trees and the forestation is coming back, we have the emergence of Lyme disease carried by a tick that feeds on white-tailed deer that now have more edge environment and have a population greater than the population they had when the Europeans discovered America. Well, one of the future opportunities is also, interestingly enough, that we increasingly are dealing with problems that cannot be solved in the way that we were taught. You know, often our teaching was such that we said, here's a problem, here's a solution, there's one and only one right answer. When in fact, climate change, antimicrobial resistance, response to emerging disease, global food security do not have a simple technical solution. There is no single right answer. And we have the opportunity to work and learn to work more effectively with these complex problems, if you will, that are representative of systems or systems of systems. They are compelling. They require, demand that we take action. The world had to take action in the face of the Ebola outbreak. And yet there's no one in charge. Who's in charge of global food security? Who's in charge of emerging diseases? Who's in charge of antimicrobial resistance? So what it says is that we need a new type of leadership. Not leadership that is positional, but leadership that is a shared, adaptive process in which we are part and an active part of an interdisciplinary team that gathers evidence, informs policy, and shares our insights to manage the risks inherent in the paradoxes we face. Paradox are those things that seem mutually exclusive, so animal welfare and slaughter, right? The oxymoron of humane slaughter. Food safety, or safe food, another oxymoron, in that there is no food that has zero risk. So it requires some paradigm shifts on our part. We need to move from this idea of fighting disease, the famous military approach, my gosh, we're going to charge disease and conquer it, to the idea that we are going to manage risks and promote health. Move from a reductionist or complement a reductionist view that says we want to name everything and characterize it to the submolecular level, to the recognition of a holistic view that says all of these issues and concepts are interconnected and must be dealt with suchly. That there's no zero risk, and that we must learn new strategies for dealing with big data. The mass of data that confronts us now is frightening for many of us and a huge opportunity for us to anticipate the future and work more effectively. And the paradigm shift then for politics is that we move from a passive, that veterinary medicine and veterinary nursing move from a passive to an active role. You know, choosing not to participate, choosing to be passive is our choice to relinquish leadership for policy to others who have less scientific training and less insights into these complex problems. And yet, where are we? On beliefs, the challenge of the present, the opportunity of the future is for us to recognize and accept that we live in a pluralistic society that demands a more holistic approach. So, the path forward, and while I haven't vetted these, I'm also going to include a few of what I might put forth as some opportunities for the RCVS. So the path forward is to enhance, to embrace this integrative adaptive leadership, to step up. The opportunity is to speak with a single voice so that we can inform public policy and private corporate policy more effectively. It is also for us to think globally while acting both globally and locally. So here are the opportunities, which I apologize to you all that I did not vet with you prior to making these suggestions. So I may be all wrong, and you can credit that to the American who came over for his speech. Number one, with your responsibility and your leadership in developing competencies for practicing veterinarians, look carefully at those competencies necessary for public good. Those competencies that relate to epidemiology, zoonoses, food safety and hygiene, etc., that have a public good implication for society. Secondly, affirm the scholarship of integration and application. The integration of knowledge, whether that might be from engineering, from nursing, from the social sciences, as well as the medical sciences, the integration of that knowledge and the application to bring about change. On the accreditation level, promote a global path to accreditation for veterinary education establishments in the developing world. Promote a path for accreditation for veterinary education establishments in the developing world. I went through those veterinary schools that are accredited by the UK, by the European, by EVE, by the Australian system or the US system. And basically, there are no institutions I could identify from the least developing countries of the world. I think we have an opportunity and an obligation not only to accredit those veterinary educational institutions, also to accredit the programs that train the paraprofessionals, the veterinary nurses and the paraprofessional vets that in much of the developing world do most of the field work. The next point, your certificates of advanced veterinary practice. I celebrate your initiative on that. I encourage you to look at two additional categories. One, a category in leadership and policy. A category in leadership and policy for that exemplary performance and knowledge to affect, through shared leadership, policy developments that recognize current evidence. And secondly, a certificate of advanced veterinary practice in communications, including risk communications. And I look to the new president with his experience in broadcasting. He certainly understands and has been successful in communicating a number of things, including the friendliness of tarantulas, to look at this opportunity to affirm, to congratulate, to acknowledge, to reward those whose expertise includes advanced veterinary practice capacity in communication, including risk communication. And then for knowledge, I am thrilled by the movement to develop this evidence-based guidance documents for veterinary clinical practitioners. I offer you or encourage you to also look at the opportunity to to produce documents to inform public policymakers about issues of the day. Public policymakers are inundated with advocacy pieces and advocacy information. They do not have a source to look to for a balanced, unbiased summation of the current science, a presentation of the policy options, and a discussion of the implications of each of those options should they be adopted, all condensed in language that a non-expert can understand in a format that's restricted to 2 pages beginning with 5 bullets. Policymakers need and want our guidance. So I end by saying, can veterinarians change the world? And my answer is yes. I'm also going to share with you that I didn't learn this in my veterinary course. I learned it through another part of my education that Stuart did not mention. I dropped out of university 4 times. I got drafted during a conflict called the Vietnam War. I'm a pacifist, so I took a route. I worked for a community organization. Essentially, I did civil rights organizing during the apartheid era in the southern United States. So I grew up in apartheid. In that process, as I would go and work with communities, and I'd walk in and I would be the only white face in the community. My mentor, the gentleman, the lawyer for whom I worked, a black lawyer who was a graduate of the LSE, on my first day on the job said to me, "White boy, these are not your problems. White boy, these are not your problems." My idealism was crushed as I wondered, well, how can I possibly make a difference? And what he taught me was the power of facilitation, the gift of active listening and communication skills, the ability to work with people to help them identify their needs, to prioritize those needs, and help the communities to be successful in taking actions. That builds capacity. That's how we can make the world a better place. So I have enjoyed and recognized through my career that each of you as individuals, as a veterinarian or a veterinary nurse, has the opportunity to change the world. Much of that opportunity, your success will never be recognized. Because I also learned that the greatest opportunity to affect change is to give others the credit. So for the ideas that I've shared today, I would like to give credit in some measure to Stuart Reed, who from the time that we first met has given me the respect of the willingness to challenge some of my perceptions and ideas and to encourage me to continue moving forward in this area of science, politics, and beliefs. Congratulations to you all, and you can change the world. Thank you.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, it is all my fault. So, Will, I think if we were to start questions, we would probably be here this time next year.
Yep.
You've provoked us hugely. There has been a series of presentations given over the last few years which have been increasingly challenging to us, challenging in a very good way, and you certainly have continued that trend. And we, I think, looking around the room, looking at the award winners today, I think we're up to the challenge. But in the meantime, thank you very much indeed. Will Hueston, ladies and gentlemen.